Hey, Georgia Studies students. I just wanted to talk to you about this unit. We have started talking about Georgia being a state, the population of Georgia moving westward. Therefore, the state capitals continue to move westward to be in the center of the population. As the population, the white settlers of Georgia started moving west, it's because we kept sending out the Native Americans more and more westward until finally the Trail of Tears, where federal troops rounded up the last of the Cherokee Indians and forced them 850 miles in the winter from Georgia to Oklahoma. So imagine walking from Georgia to Oklahoma in the middle of the winter. And so we had thousands and thousands of Native Americans that died along the trip. Very, very tragic. There were some Native Americans that actually escaped and went into North Carolina and settled there. If you've ever been to Cherokee, North Carolina, it's because of those people that were brave and were able to escape and settled up there and continued with their families and made a home in North Carolina. All right, so let me share my screen with you and we'll talk through some screens here, some slides. Let's see, I can't get this to work. All right, so let's just a couple of review questions. What job did the cotton gin make easier? The answer is it removed the seeds from the fluffy boil of the cotton. Number two, Georgia's economic growth relied heavily on the invention of the what? The railroad. Your hint was it was one of the reasons Atlanta became the capital of Georgia. All the other capitals of Georgia were settled on navigable rivers, but it was because of the railroad that Atlanta became a capital. In the year 1800, there was more railroads in Georgia than any other southern state. And what was, I'm going to say, two negative effects of the invention of the cotton gin. Two negative effects. The first one was we became a one crop economy. We had one crop economy. And the second was the dramatic increase in slave labor. All right, so the Cherokee and the Creeks, these were the two main Native American tribes in Georgia in the 1800s. And so if you look at the map, this is a map of the Indian removal in Georgia. Notice the years in 1700s, the late 1700s, we started moving the Creek Indians more and more and more to the west. So the Creek Indians were spread out along in central Georgia, and we kept pushing them farther and farther and farther west. And the Cherokee were up here in northern, the northwestern part of Georgia. This is actually Cherokee Nation. The capital of the Cherokee Nation was here it's called New Echota. You can actually go there, that you can see where they have their, well, I'll show you some pictures in a few minutes actually, because I went up there and took some pictures of some of the buildings that they recreated to show what they looked like when the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign nation in North Georgia. All right, so we have two chiefs that we want to talk about. The first guy is William McIntosh. Now, William McIntosh, so if we have a good guy and a bad guy, we're going to call McIntosh the bad guy, and John Ross is the good guy. So McIntosh was the Creek Indian tribe of, obviously, the Creek Indians, and he had split loyalty. He was actually part white and half Creek. And so he was very comfortable, kind of like Mary McIntosh, not McIntosh, what was her name? Mary Musgrove. She was half English and half Yamakra Indian. And so she was very comfortable in either culture, both languages. Well, that's what William McIntosh was too. He was a Creek Indian. He also was raised with a lot of, I was going to say English, but now American culture and the language. And so he didn't always do what was best for the Creek Indians, and he ended up paying with his life. The Creek Indians came into his home and they stabbed him, and he had a very brutal, violent death, and it's because he basically made arrangements to give up the Creek land in Georgia. So the federal government, after the Yazoo land fraud that we talked about in my last video, I talked about the Yazoo land fraud. When that all settled, the government promised Georgia that they would help remove the Native Americans out of the state of Georgia. The Creeks lost 22 million acres after the defeat by future President Andrew Jackson. So Andrew Jackson, probably one of the bad guys of this unit, because he did not do what was best for the Native Americans. In fact, he went against a decision of the Supreme Court of the United States, which no president should ever do. And so, you know, he really has a bad rap. A lot of people are now calling him a really bad guy. And, you know, now, of course, we see the mistakes that he made. However, at the time, he did what a lot of Americans wanted him to do. So he did what the people asked. And after this whole debacle with having the Native Americans removed out of Georgia, despite a decision by the Supreme Court case, or the U.S. Supreme Court, he was actually he became president of the United States again. The people didn't see what he did as terrible, and he actually became president for a second term. So he was doing what the voters of the United States wanted him to do. So anyway, so William McIntosh, like I said, he was half Scottish, half Creek. He was actually cousins with Georgia's white governor, and he signs away the remaining Creek land in Georgia in 1825, which was called the Treaty of Indian Springs. This move infuriated the Creek Nation, and he was executed at his home by 200 Creek warriors on April 30th of 1825. So he actually signed the last treaty that removed all the Creeks from Georgia. Now, I'll share this screen with you, or I'll share this slideshow with you, and you should take a minute just to watch the video about William McIntosh. There's a link at the bottom of this page. Now, the other guy, the other chief I want to talk about, his name is John Ross. We have a couple of Johns in this unit. John Ross was the leader of the Cherokee Indians. Now, he was considered a good guy because he did everything on behalf of the Cherokee Indians. He did everything he could to keep the land for them that the United States government told them that they basically were, you know, allowed to keep. The Supreme Court had made that decision. And when they were finally sent out of Georgia along the Trail of Tears, he went with the Cherokee Indians. His wife actually died on the Trail of Tears. And so he did everything he could for the benefit and for the good of the Cherokee Indians. The other John we're going to talk about, his name is John Marshall. He was the Supreme Court Chief Justice, and he is the one that made the decision that the Cherokee Nation is sovereign and they did not have to follow Georgia's rules. So the Cherokee were in northwestern Georgia. They actually sided with the British during the American Revolution. They knew that we wanted their land, and so they were trying to help the British win the American Revolution. That was one of the reasons why President Jackson's decision to remove the Cherokee wasn't so unpopular, because people saw the Native Americans as their enemy. And like we talked about last unit, when we actually wrote the Declaration of Independence, they actually called the Native American savages. Now, the Cherokee did try to mirror white society that they were living among, because the thought was, if we become like them, they will accept us and they will not want us to leave our homeland. And so they actually developed a constitution that looked a lot like the United States Constitution. They created a Supreme Court like we have. They had different branches of their government, so very similar to the government that we set up here in the United States. So doing that, they hoped that this would preserve their land and their way of life. Georgia settlers still wanted their land and put increasing pressure on the federal government to forcefully remove the Cherokee. Now, this was especially after the Dahlonega Gold Rush. So gold was found here in Georgia about 20 years before the California Gold Rush. And so that was the huge pressure to get the Cherokee off their land so we could get their gold. John Ross was the principal chief during the removal. He fought to stay on Cherokee land even after rival Ridge faction signed it away with the Treaty of the New Akota in 1835. His wife died during the Trail of Tears. Now and of course one of the biggest differences between, so there's two big differences between the Cherokee and the Chief. No, the Cherokee and the Creek. The Cherokee wanted to try to assimilate and act like the white man as far as their way of life. The other thing is that they used the court system to try to keep their land. The Cherokee did neither of those things. No, did I say that wrong? The Creek did neither of those things. They didn't use our court system, and they never tried to change their way of life to be more like the United States, the rest of the Americans that were around them. Now this is, if you go up 75 north, if you're going into Tennessee, you'll pass this. I mean, if you blink, you'll miss it, but there's signs about New Akota. And this was actually the capital of the Cherokee Nation. So this land was given to the Cherokee Indians. They said that you guys are a sovereign nation. You abide in the United States and in these states, but you're actually a sovereign nation. And like I said, they set up a government. They had a newspaper. They're the first Native American group among the others in the area at the time that had their own written language. And so New Echota is in North Georgia, and you can actually go up there. So these are pictures that I took. So they're homes that, if you look, they don't look like teepees. They look, obviously they're not. They're log homes that they built that look like many of the other homes around the same area at the time. Now these have been rebuilt, but these are what the original homes look like. Now this particular building right here was their seat of government. So this is where all of their government the official governmental activities took place. These are just other homesteads that were there in the area. You can go up there anytime and you can read all the little, they have these boards set up everywhere, and you can read about life there in the Cherokee territory. There's a picture of John Ross right there, which of course was their leader. All right, so here we have John Marshall, and here we have Andrew Jackson. So what about these guys? I've talked about them a little bit. So John Marshall was the United States Supreme Court Chief Justice. He rendered the decision in Worcester or Worcester. A lot of people call it Worcester or Worcester versus Georgia's decision that was in favor of the Cherokee Nation. The decision stated that Georgia had no right to force their laws on the Cherokee. And what did Andrew Jackson say? So famously, he said, John Marshall made the decision, now let him enforce it, which of course, the judicial system was not created to enforce the laws. They were created to interpret the laws. And so Andrew Jackson knew what he was saying when he made that statement. He was the United States president. He vowed to carry out the wishes of the people. Indian removal was a top priority. So when he was campaigning for president, he said, I will get rid of the Native Americans in the southern part of the United States. He passed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, and he pushed for the Treaty of the New Echota in 1835. He refused to enforce the decision of the Supreme Court in 1832. He allowed federal marshals to gather up the Cherokee Indians and force them to march to the area called Oklahoma. That's now called Oklahoma. Once again, I have another good video at the bottom of the screen if you guys get these slides and you want to watch that. All right, so the Dahlonega Gold Rush, you guys are actually watching a video on this. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but like I said, it was one of the major pushes finally to get the Cherokee out of Georgia. Also in the video, you're going to hear about the missionary. His name is Samuel Worcester. I can't say the name correctly, but I've heard it pronounced many different ways. But anyway, so you'll watch a video all about him. Finally, this Treaty of New Echota gave up the last of Cherokee lands. They were given 2 years to leave nicely, in quotation marks. The Ridge faction left, but Chief Ross and 12,000 Cherokee kept trying to negotiate to stay until finally they were rounded up and they were put into stockades in 1838. Over 4,000 of the Native Americans died along the Trail of Tears from Georgia to Oklahoma between October 38 and the spring of 1839 from diseases and exposure to brutal cold and snow. Like I said, about 400 of them escaped and formed the Eastern Band of Cherokee. The Oklahoma Cherokee are now known as the Western Band. So today in the United States, we have the Eastern Band and the Western Band of the Cherokee Indians. The Cherokee Nation is the largest remaining tribe remaining in the United States. And so when they rounded them up, so when you go up here to New Echota, you could actually see the beginning of the Trail of Tears. So this is one of the places that they were rounded up and forced to leave. And so, and not only, it wasn't just here, but look, even down here in Florida, they even went down there and they got these Native Americans and forced them to leave, and this group over here in Mississippi. And so it was all of these different groups down here, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, and the Choctaw. All of those were sent over to what is now Oklahoma. And they went, either they walked or they went by boat. So boat would be the easiest way, obviously, but many of them had to walk. But those are the two main ways. And this is a sign I took at the very beginning of the Trail of Tears in North Georgia. So I encourage you guys to go up there and spend a little time. Okay? All right, so just to review some of the things we talked about. After what did the Cherokee Nation pattern their Constitution? The answer is the United States Constitution. Which town in Georgia had the first gold rush in the United States? Dahlonega, that's right. Between what semi-centennial was the Treaty of Indian Springs signed? Wow, that is quite a question. So a semi-centennial would be 50 years. So it was signed between 1800 and 1850. That was a very specific question. Oh, here's our choices. Duh. Okay, so D is the right answer. All right, number 4, who argued on behalf of the Cherokee Nation before the U.S. Supreme Court? Well, it was their Chief John Ross, very intelligent man. Which president refused to enforce the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in Worcester versus Georgia? That would be Andrew Jackson. Who was the Creek chief that had a major role in their removal from Georgia? That would be William McIntosh. What is the name of the Cherokee chief that went with the Cherokees on the Trail of Tears and he lost his wife? That would be John Ross. And how did the Dahlonega Gold Rush affect life for the Georgia Indians? Well, it made their removal much faster than it probably would have been because white man wanted their land, they wanted all that gold. What became a major cash crop in Georgia after the invention of the cotton gin and railroads? Of course, that would be cotton. Who invented the cotton gin? Eli Whitney. Whitley. Eli Whitley? No, Eli Whitney. I'm gonna have to double check that. Is it Whitley or Whitney, guys? My mind just went blank. Why did Georgia's capitals move westward? So they could stay in the center of the population. What does Selma help us remember? Savannah, Augusta, Louisville, Milledgeville, Atlanta. So the Georgia capitals. What was the University of Georgia known for? It was the first public university in Georgia, or actually not in Georgia, in the United States of America. What did Georgia have more of than any other southern state by 1850? That would be railroads. And what did the railroads do? They helped move people and goods faster throughout the state. What was John Marshall's decision in the Supreme Court case? He said that the Native Americans, the Cherokee Indians, did not have to follow the laws of Georgia. What was President Andrew Jackson's role in the Indian removal process? He ignored the Supreme Court. To what state did the government force the Cherokee to relocate? That would be Oklahoma. What happened first, the Indian Removal Act or Worcester versus Georgia? Well, it was the Indian Removal Act that led to the Supreme Court case. So the Indian Removal Act happened first. How were the head right system and the land lottery similar? Well, first of all, the head right system started first. It was on the coast. And then as we moved the creek out of Georgia, then we had all that land for the land lottery. So the head right system, 200 acres were given to the head of the family. So that's how you remember that. They had a right to the land. They were a head of the family. And the land lottery gave out free land by, well, you had to buy a ticket, an inexpensive ticket. And then they had a total of 8 land lotteries throughout, what was it, about 35 years, where they gave out thousands and thousands of acres of land. Who signed the Treaty of Indian Springs, which is the treaty that got rid of the Creek Indians and was executed at his home because of it? That would be William McIntosh. William McIntosh. What was the event called when the federal government forcefully marched the Cherokee Indians to present-day Oklahoma? It would be the Trail of Tears. How many Cherokee Indians died on the trail? About 4,000. And Georgia state capitals in order. Can you do that? Savannah, Augusta, Louisville, Milledgeville, Atlanta. Oh, that's it. All right, guys. So hopefully you got all that and you understand it and it's great, and you guys are progressing through your unit well. I hope so. All right, so this will take instead of having a meeting on Thursday, this will take the place of it. So I hope you listened and you learned something, and I